Before we were even engaged, Lauren and I talked about adoption and how we wanted to use that to grow our family. Pretty quickly into our marriage, we decided to start trying to conceive biologically. Adoption fees are really high, so we set aside money with every paycheck. About a year and a half into trying to conceive biologically, we started low intervention fertility medication. In January 2015, we decided, let's look into adoption. We started doing our research and we decided infant domestic adoption was what we wanted to pursue. The next week, I found out I was pregnant. So we decided to pause our infant domestic adoption journey to spread the babies out. I quickly miscarried that baby. That was really hard. That was devastating. I knew miscarriage was hard, but I didn't know how hard it would be. I remember the first few days after our miscarriage, me and Lauren just laid in bed crying. We just cried. We couldn't stop crying. I had never felt so ugly as I did grieving that baby. During that grief process, I told Lauren I was going to write a book. I told him I was going to write the book that I needed. What I needed to know was that God was not only with me in the grief and the sadness and the loss, but that He sat with me and He grieved with me. I needed to know that it was okay to be sad. So often I was told, well, this must be God's plan. Well, you must not be ready for a baby. God needed another angel. And though I know the intentions and the heart behind these phrases were coming from kind and loving hearts, it only punctured deeper wounds. I didn't need fix-it phrases, help me feel better phrases. I needed the permission to sit in my sorrow and my loss. So I started writing. Every single day I wrote about grief and sorrow and sitting in it with God. And the more I wrote about it, the more I found Him there with me, the more grace I found to just be sad. A few months later, it felt like it was time to start the adoption process again. But that was confusing. We were still grieving the loss of our baby, but we felt like it was time. So I had to be confident that God would help me heal as we continued our adoption process. We had very little money saved by this point. We had just a couple thousand, but we were confident it was time. We used that little bit of money to pay for our home study. From there, we began fundraising. We believed in a big God that He would orchestrate what He needed to orchestrate to bring a little baby home. When we started the infant adoption process, we kind of had it all wrong. We were set out to find a baby for us. What we learned along the way was that adoption should be about finding families for babies. A couple days after our last home study interview, I decided to take a test. We were supposed to run 22 miles for this marathon that we were running in Portland, and I thought, if I'm pregnant, I don't want to run 22 miles. So I took the test and I was pregnant. I cannot tell you how scared I was. I fell over in the bathroom and I cried, and Lauren thought I saw a spider. I didn't. I saw a positive pregnancy test and I was not ready for how scared I would be. I didn't think I could do it again. I couldn't lose another baby. And Lauren said, I'll come kill the spider. And I was like, no. And I walked into the bedroom and I showed him the test, not the way I imagined sharing with him. And he just started crying and smiling. And then all I could think was, well, we'd be forced to stop our adoption process. I don't want to stop. My heart is fully going towards adoption. And so I asked Lauren, you're still into adopting, right? And he was like, absolutely, that's not even a question. So here I am, pregnant, we're adopting, and 2 weeks later, this church we had been working at and helping plant for a couple years, Lauren is traumatically fired. We found ourselves pregnant, adopting, jobless, and our rent money, we didn't have income, so our rent was soon to end. What a mess, right? Lauren decided he wanted to go back to school to become a teacher. He had connections with a job up here in Portland, Trillium, and enrolled in the grad program at George Fox. We continued showing our family profile to expectant moms making adoption plans, and every day I was still pregnant. And every day that I was pregnant, I thought, I can celebrate this life today. January 6th arrived, and I saw a situation of a baby boy born through our agency. It was around 7 a.m. and I thought, oh my gosh, we have to present. He's already born, he's fear. What if he's our son? I showed the situation to Lauren and he said, absolutely not. The agency fees are far too expensive. The agency fees were due at birth, so he was already born, and we only had about a quarter of that saved. So it felt pretty impossible. Thursday morning I woke up and I was just a mess. We had heard no so many times from different expectant moms making adoption plans. I mean, I expected moms to say no to us because we were pregnant, but that no kind of dug into me a little bit more than the others. I was sure that our son was born. I was sure that he was supposed to join us that week. So I made these sweet potato biscuits and had some jam on them and cried. A couple hours later, the agency worker asked me if we were interested in presenting to the other little boy born that morning, the one with the high agency fees. I said, of course I'm interested, but I can't. It's way too expensive. We don't have even a quarter of those funds. A couple hours went by and I couldn't get that little boy out of my mind, so I texted Emily, is her name, the agency worker. I texted Emily and I said, is that little boy, did his mom find a family? And she said, no. She's looked through 5 different family profile books and none of them feel right to her. I couldn't stop thinking about that little boy, and his agency worker called me and said, so are you going to present? And I said, I just don't know. Can you extend the fees due date? And she said, we've never done that. So then I called all these people. And I asked, do you have any extra funds that you could lend us? I know this is wild, but I think our son is born and we don't have enough money. Everybody said no. Nobody had extra money. My sister-in-law tried to comfort me and say, nobody will think less of you for not presenting to this family. And I said, it's not that I'm afraid people will think less of us. It's that I'm afraid God will make us fools. I'm afraid my faith is too big and that she might say yes and then we have to say never mind because we don't have enough money. I was afraid God wouldn't show up for the impossible. A couple hours later, the agency worker called me and said, can you please present? And I said, I know this is unique, but are you able to present to his mom and say, if this family can come up with the funds, will you choose them? About an hour later, she called and said, I showed this mom this picture of you, and she said immediately, that's my son's family. That's who I've been looking for. To which I started bawling, right? But I also needed to know, did this mom know I was also pregnant? And Emily said to me, the moment she told this boy's mama that I was pregnant, it made her even more excited. She said, oh, that makes it even better. I want my son to have a brother close in age. So that was wild. I was sitting in the Sears parking lot picking up a shed, just bawling. We had a son, and my husband didn't even know. I had to call him at work. So I called Lauren a million times and he wasn't answering. He called me back and I was sobbing, and I told him, we have a son in Utah. Don't know how we're gonna afford all the fees, but we have a son in Utah. Can you please come home early? So Lauren got home early and we celebrated, but there was a lot to do. We had to fly and meet our son. We got home that night and it was late, and we filled out all the paperwork needed. We got everything in order to fly out early the next morning. I posted a blog post saying, we are matched, our son was born, we have a whole bunch of money to raise, can you help us? Here's a link to my PayPal. Within 5 hours, we raised $5,000. I'll never forget that plane ride. I was so nauseous. Here I was, 20 weeks pregnant, flying to meet our firstborn son and just throwing up all over the plane. I was this constant mix of excitement and fear. What if his first mom didn't like me? What if she thought I was unfit? What if she... I don't know. When we got to the hospital, Lauren and I were holding hands and we were so nervous. I remember rounding the corner and seeing her holding him for the first time. She's beautiful. He was perfect. It was sacred moments, you know, rounding that corner into that hospital room. I could feel the thickness of grief. I could feel it in the air of this mom's love for her son. She loves him. I could feel the excitement in my chest, but it was met with a calmness. It was met with calm. I knew that this was a big deal, that these were sacred moments. I wasn't going to ask her to hold him. I knew she had just a few hours left with him and I would have forever, but she insisted that we hold him. So I sat next to her so she could remain as close as possible. And I held him and looked at him, and he was perfect. And I knew in those moments that he was our son, but I also knew that he wasn't yet our son. It was complicated. It was complex. I knew that he was still hers. I knew he would always be hers in a way that he will never be mine. But he would also be mine in a way that he would never be hers. It was beautiful moments. We hugged, we spent as much time together with her as possible. I wrote notes, I asked questions, we exchanged emails. I really hoped for a lot more openness than I ever expected myself to hope for, because what a gift for our son to know his biological mom. We went home from the hospital, and by home I mean we went to a rental house in Utah, and we got to know our son while also 20 weeks pregnant. That was a perfect week. And by perfect, I mean it was very messy. Our son was so sad. He cried constantly. About a week after we took him into our care, we had lunch with his first mom to say goodbye as we both flew our separate ways. I, of course, handed him right over to her to snuggle and love and say goodbye for now. He slept in her arms through the whole entire lunch. Nobody ate anything. And then I'll never forget loading back up in the car. His piercing screams were, well, they were shattering. They shattered our hearts. I can't help but think it was because he was smelling his first mom and missed her and heard her heartbeat again and thought, what is happening? Where did she go? Why am I being ripped from her? That was so hard. I just sat in the car crying and praying over him and asking Jesus to comfort him. So now it was time to begin our attachment, parenting, and bonding, and prepare for labor. We had less than 5 months before my due date. I knew that birth unfolds unexpectedly. You can't control birth, but I was still so excited to plan a home birth. The real only reason we craved biological kids, or at least just one, was because I love pregnancy so much. I wanted to experience that. It's such a miracle. And I also wanted to conquer labor. I was so excited to finally experience that. It felt like the most precious time with an infant on my chest and a baby in my belly. Ira's birth ended up being one of the most traumatic events of my life. What began as a home birth ended up as a cesarean where I was knocked out cold. It took 3 days of hard labor, and what kept me going each day, each contraction, was imagining Ira placed on my chest in that magical moment of meeting. I didn't have that moment. That moment was ripped from me. After our traumatic birth experience, I had those first few months of postpartum depression that so many moms experience. It was a few months filled with intense grieving and immense celebrating. Here I was coexisting with so much sadness and so much joy. 2 babies, not even 5 months apart. What a life to live.
Are you having fun in the swing? Boo! Boo!
Today I sit and I'm really thankful. I'm thankful because I've learned some hard truths to learn that I think we could all learn. I've learned that it's okay to not be okay. When I think back to Ira's birth and the way I met him, it still bums me out, but I'm in a much better place now. I've healed a bit, physically and emotionally. About 5 months after Ira was born, I decided to really start writing. I needed to write the book that I needed. I needed a book that said God did not shame sorrow. I needed a book that said God sits with us in pain and grieves with us. Not that He lets us wallow in self-pity, but that there is space to be sad. There is space to lament. There is space to grieve. Raising virtual twins is wild and chaotic and crazy and very sleepless. We did not sleep a lot. But we're constantly standing over these two cribs and thinking, is this really our life? Are these really our boys? We're sure lucky. We're sure blessed. Hey guys, thanks for watching. And thank you to everyone who's invested in our story and walked with us through this journey. The book is finished. It'll be available and published and released September 18th. It's called This Undeserved Life, Uncovering the Gifts of Grief and the Fullness of Life. You can find it on my website. Thank you again.